The day Captain Vera Knox strode into my trading post, I should have recognized her as a harbinger of upheaval. But instead of listening to that instinctive warning, I found myself distracted by the sheer absurdity of her presence. She barely reached my shoulder in height, clad in scavenged scraps of armor that looked held together by stubbornness and sheer force of will. Her dark hair was knotted back in a tangle, and she wore a grin so cocky it made me want to either knock her flat or buy her a drink. Perhaps both. "I need a weapon," she declared, dropping a pouch of credits onto my counter with enough force to make my entire display rattle. "I am Croth Vel 9. For over 40 cycles I've dealt in arms, trading rifles to mercenaries, pistols to pirates, and blades to any desperate soul who had coin to spend. I've seen every sort of fool swagger through my doors. Yet no species has ever amused me quite like the humans. They march through the galaxy with the audacity of conquerors, despite being one of the youngest races to touch the stars. Their confidence is both laughable and oddly admirable." "What kind of weapon?" I asked, gesturing to the arsenal glittering along my walls. Plasma rifles and energy blades rested beside exotic projectile systems from a dozen worlds. "Blaster? Rifle? Something with a bit more boom." Knox shook her head, scanning the inventory with those piercing blue eyes, sharp and calculating. "None of that. I want something that takes skill. Something that separates amateurs from professionals." Now this was unusual. Most humans demanded the largest and loudest contraption they could carry, desperate to project dominance through firepower. This one was different, asking not for destruction, but for precision. "Skill, you say?" I turned toward the back of my shop, curiosity stirring. "And what makes you believe you have any?" Her boots made barely a whisper on the metal floor as she followed. "Let's just say I have experience with unconventional warfare." I snorted at the arrogance, but something in her voice stilled my mockery. There was confidence there, yes, but also an edge, something that made the spines along my back prickle with unease. In the farthest corner, beneath layers of dust, rested my most treasured relic, the Veltar hunting bow. 3 meters of curved magnificence, carved from the bones of a Grax beast that had terrorized my world for centuries. Its string was woven from Thernian spider silk, thrumming faintly with restrained energy. "This," I said, my claws tracing the ridged surface with reverence, "is not for sale." Knox stepped closer, eyes widening at the sight of it. Most species would have recoiled, sensing the bow's lethal weight. It was designed for the Grax hunters, towering beings with 4 arms, each limb stronger than a cargo mech. The draw was calibrated for titans. For her, it should have been nothing but impossible. "It's beautiful," she whispered, and an unfamiliar pride surged through my chest. "Beautiful, yes. But useless to you." I gestured at her slight frame. "This weapon was forged for hunters who stand 4 meters tall, beings who crush steel barehanded. You'd need a crane to draw it." Knox moved slowly around it, studying every curve, every etched story carved into its grip. "What's the range?" I couldn't help the swell of pride. 12 kilometers with standard ammunition, 20 with specialized rounds. The Grax hunters used it to kill predators larger than your warships. "And the draw weight?" My laugh rumbled through the room. 800 kilograms. No human has ever drawn a Veltar bow. It's beyond your species' limits. But she wasn't listening. Her fingers brushed the grip with a reverence I hadn't expected, eyes alight with a dangerous fascination. "How much?" "I told you," I growled, "it's not for sale." Her gaze lifted, steady and unyielding. "Everything is for sale, Croth. The question is price." I named a sum meant to break her resolve, a fortune large enough to purchase a starship or outfit an army. Without hesitation, she produced a credit chip, its balance making my scanner shriek with excitement. "Done," she said. I stared in disbelief. "You can't be serious." But she was already reaching for the bow. Reflexively, I caught her wrist. Her bones felt fragile beneath my grip, as if I could shatter them with the slightest pressure. Listen carefully, human. This weapon will kill you, not your enemies. The instant you try to draw that string, it will tear your arms from their sockets. Knox met my stare, utterly fearless. That same maddening confidence blazed in her eyes. That's my problem, isn't it? Against all reason, I released her. The credits were already flooding into my account. The deal was sealed. She lifted the bow, its frame towering nearly twice her height. It should have been absurd, watching her cradle a weapon built for giants. Yet the sight sent a strange tremor through me, as if I were witnessing the start of something history would not forget. "I'll need ammunition," she said casually, as though she were ordering a meal. I gestured weakly toward a case of projectiles. "Standard hunting arrows are there. Though I doubt you'll ever." She cut me off, selecting the heaviest shafts I stocked, each tipped to pierce Starship hull plating. She slung the quiver across her back with practiced ease, then turned once more. "Is there a testing range nearby?" The question nearly made me choke. "A testing range? For the Veltar bow? You actually intend to fire that thing?" I asked. "That was the general idea," Knox replied. Madness. Complete, unfiltered madness. Yet instead of turning her away, I found myself pointing toward the exit. "There's an abandoned mining complex 10 kilometers north of here. It's been lifeless for years. If you're determined to end yourself, that's as good a graveyard as any." Knox's grin spread, and something cold twisted in my stomach. It wasn't the grin of someone about to attempt reckless folly. It was the expression of someone who already knew the outcome. "Perfect," she said. "Want to come watch?" I should have refused. Any sensible trader would have stayed in the safety of their shop and awaited the inevitable news of the humans' spectacular demise. But curiosity has always been my curse, and hers was a challenge I couldn't ignore. "Fine," I grumbled, snatching my hoverbike keys. "But I am not paying for your funeral." The mining site rose from the horizon like the bones of some colossal beast. Rusted excavators sprawled across the scarred earth, and the processing plant loomed above us, its metal husk silhouetted against a violet sky. Knox surveyed the scene with a soldier's eye, methodical and precise. "This will do nicely," she said, setting her gear by the remains of the loading dock. I retreated to what I considered a safe distance, thumbed my personal shield generator to life, and braced myself. If the bow detonated from the strain, I had no desire to be caught in the shockwave. Knox lifted an arrow, her movements smooth, practiced. She'd handled bows before, though never anything like the Veltar. Planting her feet shoulder-width apart, she raised the weapon. This would be it, I thought. The moment reality asserted itself, the bow would resist, and she would be forced to concede that humans were not built for such relic. Then she drew. Her muscles tensed, shoulders trembling, breath coming harsh and uneven. Her face flushed with strain. She was fighting a war with physics itself, one she was destined to lose. And then the string moved. Barely. A few centimeters at most. But it moved. I blinked, convinced it was a hallucination. No human should have been able to shift that cord a fraction, not under 800 kilograms of resistance. And yet she adjusted her grip and pulled again. The string crept further back. Then further still. Sweat rolled down her forehead. Her arms quivered with the impossible weight. But she did not stop. Inch by inch, she forced the bow into submission until, against everything I knew, she reached full draw. For 3 eternal seconds she held it. Then she released. The sound was like thunder splitting the sky. The arrow blurred from the bow faster than my eyes could track. It struck a steel support column and punched through it as though it were no more substantial than paper. The beam, thick as a tree trunk, simply vanished where the projectile passed. The shaft kept going, smashing machinery, ripping through ancient debris, embedding itself in the far wall of the plant. The entire structure groaned under the impact. I stood there, jaw slack, my mind scrambling to comprehend the sight. The laws of biology, the limits of muscle, the immutable truths of physics, All of them lay shattered in the dust. Knox lowered the bow, chest heaving but otherwise composed. She turned toward me, and that maddening grin was back. "Not bad for a first shot," she said. "Though my stance could use some adjusting." It took me several attempts before I could form words. "How?" She tilted her head. "How what? How did you draw that bow? Your species lacks the muscle density, the bone strength. The leverage ratios are impossible. It should not be physically possible for you to generate that force." Knox ignored the protest and set another arrow. Her hands moved with growing familiarity, her body already adapting. She drew again. This time, the string yielded more easily. "You know what I love about this galaxy?" she said, her voice steady despite the strain. "Everyone thinks they know human limit. They look at us and see weakness, frailty. They think they understand what we're capable of." The second arrow loosed with a thunderclap, tearing through another column with the same devastating precision. This time I tracked the projectile's entire path, its velocity staggering, its destructive power beyond anything I'd ever seen in a handheld weapon. "And the truth?" she continued, drawing yet again. "When someone tells us something is impossible, we take that as a personal challenge." The third shot ripped through 3 support beams in a single line. Metal screamed as the plant's roof began to sag under its own weight. I stared at the slight human before me, this woman who should not have been able to even budge the weapon, now casually tearing apart industrial structures as though it were nothing. The same weapon I had promised would kill her. "What are you?" I whispered. Knox slung the bow across her shoulder and walked back toward the bike. "I'm someone who's learned that the universe is full of so-called impossibilities." She paused, turning back, her blue eyes gleaming with something both dangerous and electric. "And you know what I've discovered about impossible things, Croft?" She smiled, sharp as a predator's. "They're usually just the things no one's tried hard enough to make possible." As we rode back toward town, I kept stealing glances at the human beside me. Knox carried the Veltar bow as if it were an extension of her own body, strapped across her back like it had always belonged there. Somehow, impossibly, it did. I had spent 40 cycles selling weapons. I thought I understood how physiology dictated capability, how anatomy determined what tools each species could wield. I thought I knew the boundaries. Yet Knox had shattered every calculation, every assumption I had ever made about the limitations of her kind. And I had the unsettling feeling that her demonstration was only the beginning. When we reached my shop, Knox dismounted with quiet efficiency and immediately inspected the weapon. She ran her hands along its frame, tested the string's tension, and checked for damage. Finding none, she nodded, satisfied. "Thank you for the range," she said matter-of-factly. "The bow performs exactly as promised." I managed a weak nod. "You are welcome." She moved to leave, then paused at the doorway, that infuriating grin tugging at her lips. "Oh, one more thing. You mentioned no human has ever drawn a Veltar bow." "That is correct." "Well, now you can't say that anymore." And with that maddening cheer, she walked out into whatever destiny had brought her to my corner of the galaxy. I remained there for a long time afterward, staring at the empty doorway, trying to process what had just unfolded. Eventually, I gave up and turned back to rearranging my inventory, though nothing looked the same. Every weapon I touched, every instrument of death I catalogued, carried the same haunting question: what if the wrong human got their hands on this? Or perhaps, depending on perspective, the right human. Either way, I knew one thing: our galaxy was about to grow far more dangerous. 3 days later, the first rumors reached me. A cargo hauler had been found adrift near the Valdris belt. The crew was gone, save for the captain, who raved about a human archer who walks through walls. Security footage revealed a familiar silhouette clad in salvaged armor. One by one, the ship's defenses were dismantled with uncanny precision, each shot from what appeared to be a primitive bow cutting through energy shielding and bulkheads like parchment. 2 days after that, word came of a slave transport liberated under equally mysterious circumstances. This time there were survivors, freed prisoners who spoke in awe of a small human woman who appeared like a phantom in the corridors, loosing arrows that tore through armored guards as if they were unprotected. By any reasonable measure, I should have been alarmed. After all, I was the one who had armed her. The destruction she wrought bore my signature by proxy. Yet worry was not the emotion I felt. No, it was something closer to fascination. Perhaps even pride. She was targeting slavers, pirates, the very vermin the galaxy would be better without. If chaos was to follow her, perhaps it was a chaos worth encouraging. On the 7th day, my curiosity was rewarded. Knox strode back into my shop, looking absurdly cheerful for someone who had apparently launched a one-woman war against the criminal underworld. "Good morning, Croft," she said, setting a heavy metal case onto my counter. "I need to buy some supplies." The case immediately set my spines on edge. Military-grade construction, reinforced plating, multiple locks, and a bioscanner embedded in the handle. "More arrows?" I asked cautiously. "Actually," she said, flipping the case open, "I need information." Inside were rows of neatly arranged credit chips, more wealth than I normally saw in a cycle. Specifically, I need to know about the hegemony's operations in this sector. The air in my shop seemed to grow colder. The Sidhari hegemony was not a name to invoke lightly. Their slaving empires stretched across systems, their cruelty legendary even among criminals. Other syndicates paled beside them. "Why would you want to know about them?" I asked carefully. Knox slid a single chip onto the counter. My scanner lit up with numbers so high they made my vision blur. "Because," she said evenly, "they have something that belongs to me. And I intend to get it back." I stared at her, this fragile-looking human who had walked into my shop only a week earlier, now calmly announcing her intention to strike against one of the most feared powers in known space. "What could they possibly have?" I asked quietly. "That would be worth your life?" Knox's cheer vanished. Her expression hardened into something cold, dangerous, a stillness that made my scales itch. "My daughter." The word landed like a detonator. Oh. The revelation explained everything and nothing at once. "The hegemony does not usually resort to abduction," I said slowly. "Their business relies on legal indentures, debt bondage, false contract. Kidnapping is inefficient. They made an exception." Her voice was flat, stripped of any trace of emotion. 3 months ago, they decided humanity's newest colony needed to be reminded of its place. They seized 1,200 colonists, citing fabricated trade violations. Among them was my daughter. My stomach twisted. I had heard whispers of the Qatari colony incident, but the official reports spoke of a voluntary relocation program. If Knox was right, then the hegemony hadn't just enslaved. They had committed an act of war against human space. "How old is she?" I asked. 16, Knox said, her voice like sharpened steel. "She was working in the hydroponics bay when they came. They took everyone between 15 and 30. Prime labor stock, they called it." She snapped the case closed. Now I understood why she had demanded a weapon of skill, not brute force. She wasn't preparing for a battle. She was preparing for a hunt. The hegemony's central processing hub in this sector is on Gorvax Prime, I admitted at last, my voice reluctant. "But Knox, listen to me carefully. That place is a fortress. 3,000 guards. Automated defense arrays. A full squadron of patrol ships in orbit. Even if you somehow manage to get inside, getting out again would be impossible." Knox's smile cut sharper than any blade, and for a fleeting moment I wanted to crouch behind my counter and hide. "You know what I love about aliens?" she asked softly. "You all think in terms of armies and sieges. Frontal assault. Overwhelming firepower. You build walls and then you waste lives trying to tear down walls." She leaned forward, blue eyes fixed on mine, gleaming like twin stars. But humans learned long ago that the best way to take down a fortress is not to batter its gates. It's to make the people inside open them for you. Before I could demand clarification, she was already striding for the door. I'll need detailed schematics, she called back. Guard rotations, transport logs, everything you can find on their networks. Can you get that? I should have said no. Every instinct screamed at me to say no. To involve oneself with someone plotting against the hegemony was the kind of mistake that ended with midnight raids and interrogation cells. But then I thought of my own daughter, taken by raiders before she had even shed her first scales. Knox's determination, her fierce edge, stirred memories I had buried long ago. It will cost extra, I muttered. Without hesitation, Knox placed another credit chip on the counter, not even bothering to glance at the sum. Whatever it takes. The next 2 days were a blur of desperate favors and costly bribes. I pulled every string I had, risked contacts who would never forgive me, and funneled credits into every shadowed corner of the sector's information market. Piece by piece, the picture emerged. The Gorvax installation was carved into the side of a mountain, its main entry points sealed by choke points bristling with firepower. The processing center, the heart of the complex where new slaves were catalogued, was buried deep in the rock, behind layer after layer of security. Sensors could detect a whisper from a kilometer away. Guards were rotated in unpredictable shifts, trained specifically to repel extraction attempts. Everything about the facility screamed one thing: impenetrable. By the time Knox returned for the intel, I had already rehearsed my plea. Knox, listen to me. This isn't a pirate hauler you can disable with a few lucky shots. This is a military-grade citadel. They will sense you before you cross the perimeter. They will drown you in fire before you loose a single arrow. They have my daughter, Knox interrupted, voice low and razor-sharp. And that makes this personal. She plucked the datapad from my claws, glanced briefly at the schematics, and tucked it into her jacket. Thank you, Croth. You've been more helpful than you realize. At least tell me you have a strategy, I begged. Some plan beyond walking up to the front gate and asking politely. Knox paused in the doorway, her expression unreadable. Do you know why humans are the only species to successfully domesticate carnivorous pack hunters? The question stunned me. No? Because we understood something no other species did. The key to controlling predators isn't dominance. It's belonging. You convince them that you're part of the pack. Her smile was feral. The Sidhari believe they're apex predators. But they've never had a human walk into their den and decide to join their pack. And with that, she vanished into the noise of the street. 2 weeks passed in silence. Then the galaxy erupted. Every news feed screamed with chaos from Gorvax Prime. Officials blamed a catastrophic systems failure. Surveillance feeds crashing simultaneously, guard communications scrambled by interference, transport logs corrupted beyond recognition. And in the midst of this orchestrated confusion, every slave cell in the mountain complex was unlocked. Reports conflicted wildly. Some guards swore an army of insurgents stormed the facility. Others claimed only a single phantom moved through the halls. The few surviving fragments of footage showed nothing but empty corridors and doors swinging wide. When reinforcements finally arrived, over 800 slaves had vanished. No escape routes detected. No transports flagged. It was as if the captives had dissolved into thin air. The Sidhari were incandescent with fury. They swept the sector with their patrols, tearing apart freighters, interrogating civilians, storming mining outposts. And yet they found nothing. 3 days later, Knox walked back into my shop as if she had merely gone on an errand. Same salvaged armor. Same cocky grin. Same maddening calm. Except this time, a young human girl walked at her side. She had Knox's eyes, the same piercing blue, and her stance carried the kind of defiant poise I had never seen in one so young. Croth, Knox called cheerfully. I'd like you to meet my daughter, Maya. The girl stepped forward, chin lifted. "Thank you for helping my mother," she said simply. "We both know she couldn't have done it without you." I stared at them both, words deserting me. "How?" I finally whispered. Knox shrugged, casual as a hunter cleaning her blade. "I told you. The key to handling predators is convincing them you belong to their pack. So I convinced the hegemony guards that I was one of them." "That's impossible," I said hoarsely. "They have bioscanners, genetic identifiers, psychological profiling protocols. They would never mistake you for—" "They have all of those systems," Knox agreed evenly. "Bioscanners, genetic identifiers, psychological profiling, yes. But those only work for known species. Humanity is still new to the galactic stage. Our physiology hasn't been fully catalogued yet. With the right equipment, a human can pass for a dozen different species. If they know what they're doing." She reached into her pack and produced a compact device, no larger than a medical scanner. Its edges shimmered faintly, the surface marked with human improvisation, panels pried open, components rewired. I blinked. "That's a holographic disguise generator." My voice dropped to a whisper. "Military grade. It projects false biosignatures to trick sensors. That tech exists, yes, but it's prohibitively expensive and unreliable at best." "Where did you get it?" "Built it," Knox said simply, as if it were obvious. "Humans are good at making do when we need to." Maya stepped forward, her voice calm but edged with pride. She spent 3 days dissecting Sothri physiology. Another 4 infiltrating their command chain. By the time she reached the cells, half their guards believed she was their commanding officer. "And the other half?" I asked, almost afraid of the answer. Knox's grin sharpened. "The other half learned why it's unwise to separate a human mother from her child." For the next hour, Knox and Maya recounted the escape in unflinching detail. It was not the tale of a warrior storming the gates. It was the work of a virus. Step by step, Knox had infiltrated the hegemony's mountain fortress, corrupting systems from within until the entire structure collapsed under its own weight. The brilliance lay not only in her entry, but in the exodus. 800 souls freed, transported out aboard the hegemony's own ships, reprogrammed to follow new courses Knox had hardwired into their navigation. By the time anyone realized what was happening, the captives were already scattered across a dozen systems, many en route to the safety of human space. "The Sidhari are still hunting for us," Maya explained as they prepared to leave. "But they're searching for an army. A massive operation with fleets and firepower. They're not looking," Knox added with a smirk, "for 2 humans with a bow. Which is exactly the way we like it." At the threshold, Knox paused and turned back, her eyes alight with that familiar, dangerous confidence. "By the way, Croth, I have a proposition." My spine stiffened. "What kind of proposition?" "The kind that involves more money than you've ever dreamed of," she said. "And the satisfaction of irritating some very unpleasant people. How would you like to become the exclusive weapons supplier for a new organization dedicated to liberating slaves throughout this sector?" I stared at her, then at Maya, then back again. These 2 humans had achieved the impossible, armed with nothing but intelligence, audacity, and a bow I had once sworn would kill her. "What would you call this organization?" I asked quietly. Knox and her daughter exchanged a look. Maya gave a single resolute nod. "We're calling it the Broken Chain Initiative," Knox said. "And we're going to teach the galaxy that humans take a very different approach to slavers." I thought of the arrogant species who assumed they understood humanity's limit. I thought of the syndicates who preyed on the vulnerable without consequence. And I thought of Knox's eyes when she first spoke of her daughter. "When do we start?" I asked. Knox's grin could have powered a starship. "We already have. And that, my friends, is how I learned the most dangerous truth about humanity. When they are told something is impossible, they don't waste time debating. They simply find a way." The Sidhari hegemony collapsed within 6 months. Not from fleets or diplomacy, but from Knox's campaign of liberation, a relentless erosion that stripped them of their slaves, their power, their reputation. Other criminal empires learned quickly. They avoided human space entirely, unwilling to provoke a people who treated impossible as nothing more than a personal challenge. Knox and Maya became legends, the archer who walked through walls and her daughter, the phantom codebreaker who could unravel any system. Together, they transformed slave liberation from a hopeless ideal into a movement that reshaped the sector. And me? I became the wealthiest arms dealer alive. Not because I trafficked in devastation, but because I chose to supply weapons to those who refused to bow to limit. The Veltar bow still hangs in my shop, though Knox eventually returned it after Gorvax. She told me she had found something better. When I asked what could possibly surpass a weapon that had terrorized entire star systems, she only smiled. In time I understood. The greatest weapon in the galaxy is not forged of bone or steel. It is a human who has decided the rules do not apply to them. She was right, of course. She almost always was. I keep the bow not for its value, but as a reminder that the universe is littered with the supposedly impossible. And somewhere, always, there is a human ready to prove that impossible is only another word for hasn't been tried yet. Milky Way, if you've journeyed this far with me, traveler, then I invite you to stay. Subscribe to the channel, share this tale, and let your voice join ours. Tell us in the comments what you thought of Knox, of Maya, and of the galaxy's fragile empires. And share the worlds, the stories, the impossible challenges you'd like to see humanity face next. Because as we've learned, the impossible never stays impossible for long.